Good afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and this is the podcast, Life Along the Merrimack. We meet each week and we talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. Sometimes we have guests, sometimes I show slides of the river, and sometimes I start to pontificate on my latest interest about the river. This is 96.3 FM radio, Channel 9 local cable, and this is archived on YouTube. So I just wanted to mention a couple things about the river and my involvement with it. I have written a book called Life Along the Merrimack. It came out about a year ago. And right now I'm making plans to have an educational program. I am going to give away copies of the book. It's a $24 value and they'll be free. My new motto about publishing is, if you can't sell the book, give them away. No, I'm just kidding. What happened is I'm interested in having more people learn about the river, learn about its issues with pollution, and so we can have a more knowledgeable resident group, and so we can do better about pressing for cleaner water and also having a closer touch to the political process to get some money to clean up the sewage treatment plants in Lawrence, Lowell, Haverhill, Manchester, New Hampshire. They are still creating significant pollution. Now, the EPA, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, and the state environmental people know this, but you just can't work so fast. Like Lawrence, they write a letter to Lawrence and said, you guys are still polluting. And they say, we're a poor town, we don't have the money, etc. So it's my theory that if we get a more informed citizenry, we can go back in each town and just press for more federal money. There is federal money available. And Congresswoman Lori Trahan and Congressman Seth Moulton, who represent parts of the North Shore, are working on it. But if they knew that people really wanted a clean river, then they might work a little harder. And, as I say this, I'm trying to amplify the mission of the book. The book is called Merrimack, the Resilient River. And a local benefactor named Dan Healy of Amesbury has agreed to be a person who helps buy the books and lets me distribute them for free. So for instance, I would call up the Merrimack River Watershed Council and say, would you like 24 books to give away at your next annual meeting or your next meeting of kayakers going down the Merrimack? And they would say, fine, why is it free? And then I say, well, Dan Healy, who is, as I say, a wealthy benefactor, has helped fund this program so we can amplify the message of a clean river. And why a clean river, you might say? Well, people boat on the river, they fish in the river, all those things I think we know. One thing most of us aren't as aware of is that more than 500,000 people along the river still get their drinking water from the Merrimack. Now, obviously, there are scientific ways to clean the water. It's been clean, since the last shakeup in 1890, when they realized the river wasn't very clean. It was creating typhoid in some riverfront communities. And so we assume that the water is clean. But even so, you can never be too sure. There are numerous books out saying, that river water in different parts of the country is not as clean as it should be. Now, some of us are aware of, say, Flint, Michigan. And for several years, Michigan state officials were saying, our drinking water is fine. And yet people were getting sick, and they found out that drinking water was not fine. So I'm not saying the drinking water of the Merrimack is not fine. It probably is. But the fewer pollutants we have in the water, the better. the fact that we know that there are better ways to clean the water, we have to keep pressing for it. And now many of you listening to this live in Newburyport. So water in Newburyport does not come from the Merrimack, and drinking water for Salisbury and Amesbury also does not come from the Merrimack. But in Lawrence, North Andover, parts of Lowell, and numerous communities up in that area, they still get their drinking water from the Merrimack River. And so that's one of the reasons I want to get my book out there, keep doing this podcast. I do speak in the summertime. Since COVID has come along, I speak mostly on Zoom to library groups, to civic groups, and that type of thing. And I'll be speaking again this summer. And one reason I'll be speaking is I have another book coming out, and that is called Plum Island, A Vulnerable Gem. And so I've spent about several years putting it together. It's 75 color photos of Plum Island, many of them from the air. I'd never seen many of them, and I've seen a lot of photos. I was with the Daily News for 5 years, covering City Hall and the waterfront. So I've been out in the community quite a bit. I had never seen many of these photos. So I will be talking about that book, Plum Island, when it comes out June 27th. But because of Dan Healy, because of this education program called the Dan Healy River Education Program, I will be speaking more. And so I just wanted to mention that today. It's an exciting thing for me to be able to amplify the message of a clean river, because I guess, I grew up reading books. Now in my age group, I'm writing books, and yet I'm finding a lot of people don't buy books or they don't read books. And if you want a message to get out, like the value of a clean Merrimack, you have to do more. And so in this case, I am giving away books. And Dan Healy, who used to own ARC Manufacturing Industries in Amesbury, it employs, scores of people. It works on materials, sophisticated materials, including those for the space program. He sold that several years ago, and he's become a very generous person on the North Shore. He's given money to the Custom House Maritime Museum, towards my neighbor's table, towards the Carriage Museum in Amesbury. He's a great guy. Happily, he's decided to fund the dispersal of books about the river. And so we're going to be doing that. The Merrimack, as you might know, and if you're listening, I would say I'm starting a slide presentation. And this shows where the Merrimack starts in Franklin, New Hampshire. It comes down to about Lowell, where the number 3 is, and pushes east towards Newburyport. So it's 117 miles long and is quite an asset. The Merrimack River was a great place for shipbuilding. Here is a slide that shows Newburyport in about 1852. This is an artistic presentation done by the very capable Rich Jones. He is the city clerk of Newburyport, but obviously he's a lot more. And look how large those vessels were. They went around the world in the age of sail, and Newburyport was one of the leading shipbuilders in the colonies. Here's a wonderful photo from about 1893, which shows the ship Simonton. It's topping off, as they say in the construction industry. The ship was finished. It was about to be pushed into the Merrimack, and you can see what a festive day it was. Women here in the foreground got dressed up. Kids got out of school, either by ducking it or whatever. And this is a transitional moment. There are a lot of horse and buggies that came down, and there were just hundreds of people here. And look how large that vessel was, over 300 feet, over 400 tons. But you can see how small the people on it really look. And the Merrimack River, after being a great place for building ships, became the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. It had many mills, and cotton would be shipped up from the south on rails. We're looking at a photo here of the Spigot River in Lawrence, a major tributary to the Merrimack. There were, many mills at this time in the late 19th century. Mills started being built on the Merrimack in 1822. Yeah, that's 200 years ago this year. And Lowell became, a major source of mills, and they had much cotton, much wool. They made shoes thereafter. Lawrence was built in about 1848 as a planned city because Lowell was doing so well. Haverhill also became a major place in terms of building mills and then later making cotton and clothing. Here's the mill clock in Lawrence, which is still there. It once was the second largest clock in the world next to Big Ben in London. But it shows a mill, probably in the early 1920s or 30s. The clock was very valuable. Here is a photo, and again, to radio listeners, we're looking at slides. This is Manchester, New Hampshire, and you can see this many mills there, of course, but this was a great flood in 1936. And there was a terrific flooding that year in New England on the main rivers, the Androscoggin, the Kennebec, the Connecticut River to the south. Enormous amounts of water came down. This is the Ameskeag Manufacturing Company mills. They were actually about to peak because in 1936, the South was building mills. There was organized labor up here, which some of the owners didn't like. But here was a devastating overflow of the Merrimack River. This is a very dynamic photo. Here is the wonderful Merrimack where it meets the Atlantic in Newburyport. And you can see a sandbar in the foreground of this photo. And it's always been a difficult river for boaters. Sometimes it's easy, of course, but if you think you have the tide could be coming in, going westerly, the river is flowing easterly, and depending on the fall of the tide, you can have the river meeting the ocean tides and have a very rough time. And you can see that sandbar. The Merrimack is also known for the Coast Guard. Here is a photo of several Coast Guard vessels in Newburyport. Newburyport is the birthplace of the Coast Guard because in about 1789, the first vessels were built here, 1790. The first Coast Guard vessel was built here. They were called revenue cutters. The word Coast Guard didn't come into our lexicon until about 1915, but this was the birthplace of the Coast Guard. And here's a photo that we all love. This is in Amesbury, looking at Maudsley State Park, the river, upriver a little bit. It's quiet. Maudsley State Park is behind, and that's why we love the river. It's just terrific. And if you're listening, this is Dyke Hendrickson. The podcast is Life Along the Merrimack. It's on 96.3 FM, Joppa Radio, Channel 9, local cable TV, and it's archived on YouTube. Haverhill is a community that's made a big comeback in recent years. Here we see a new building going up in Haverhill along the Merrimack. You see there are classrooms from Northern Essex Community College in Haverhill. There are new condos, new apartments. So Haverhill is making a comeback along the Merrimack. Lowell also has utilized the Merrimack River. This is in the mid-70s, the National Park Service created a wonderful museum in Lowell. I think Paul Tsongas, the senator, helped grease the skids on that one, if you will. But there's a wonderful museum in Lowell, which looks at the history of the river, the history of the mill industry. And here is a vessel going out with tourists going up the river. And also there are many tributaries and small areas and locks and small parts of the river that a vessel like this can go up. And here's a wonderful photo. The Merrimack River starts in Franklin, New Hampshire. And here's a photo right in Franklin, New Hampshire. It looks like it could have looked 4 centuries ago. There are rocks, there's white water, there's plenty of trees, and there's wonderful kayaking and canoeing way upriver. The Nashua River and the Merrimack merge in Nashua, New Hampshire. Here is a photo of that. And on a calm day, the Merrimack is a beautiful thing. Another shot of Lowell, Mass. And here you can see, part of the body works that have gone up to capture the strength of the river. Here are some locks, here are some canals. In the background, you're looking at UMass Lowell. You're looking at some natural rock as well. And so Lowell has done a lot with the Merrimack River. And here is another shot of Lowell to show you that it is quite versatile in what it can offer. Here's some fishermen on the right, a few joggers. There's some mothers walking their kids along the river. And it's a beautiful part of the river. And upwards of Lowell, the river is, quite clean. We should point out, Manchester, New Hampshire, of course, if they let go and have sewage come down, it is not clean. That being said, in recent years, the past couple of years, there have been efforts to get sewage treatment plants to make announcements. Now, what we're talking about is combined sewage overflow, CSO. And several of the major cities along the Merrimack have sewage treatment plants along the river. The pipes for the sewage goes into the sewage treatment plant, but pipes from rainwater from heavy storms also goes into the sewage treatment plant. That's the way they were built in the early 70s. So when we get heavy rains, which does happen frequently, particularly now with climate change doing its little old thing, you get rainwater going in, you get sewage there, and it can't absorb all that matter. And so they open the gates up and they discharge everything. That means the rainwater goes in, but the raw sewage also goes in the Merrimack River. That happens numerous occasions throughout the summer and fall. The feds know about it. They're working to do a better job. But the CSO is basically one of the major reasons why we have to keep working to try to make a cleaner Merrimack River. Here is Manchester again. There's still, you're looking at large, waterfalls here. They're collecting energy as they did 200 years ago. And there's scores of small energy plants still operating on the Merrimack River. I was surprised at that. The source of hydropower is still being used. And then as I say, I was also surprised to learn that 500,000 people at least get their drinking water from the Merrimack. Several years ago, here's a photo we're looking at. That's State Rep Jim Kelcourse in the foreground. Lane Glenn, the president of Northern Essex Community College, is behind him. And they're coming through some modified whitewater, I think probably in the Haverhill area. No, it's probably a little farther up. Anyway, they're hitting whitewater here. And they took a trip in 2019 down the river to bring attention to the beauty of the river and also what needs to be done. And this is farther downriver in the Lawrence Haverhill area. And here about a dozen of these voyagers are going slowly down the river. They had a wonderful time. It rained almost every day. There are 4 nights, 117 miles we know the river is. So they do about 30 a day. And several times it rained. So at the end of the day, they meet with media, they meet with town officials, they talk about the value of the river, but they also met some rain. Here's a wonderful shot of fishing paraphernalia, a couple fishing boats. Fishing has basically disappeared from the Merrimack River, commercial fishing, I'm saying. There are maybe 6 or 8 boats there. You know, a century ago, there were probably 100. But as we know, the fishing industry has changed, and it's difficult to do that. Here's one of the heroes, and I'm moving quickly. We're getting out of time. Senator Ed Muskie was a national figure in 1968 when he ran for vice president, but he also was instrumental in passing the Clean Water Act of 1972. George Mitchell, another senator from Maine, was instrumental in getting amendments put on in 1987. President Reagan at that time said, I don't want to have grants for sewage treatment plants anymore. And Mitchell's a great compromiser, said, all right, don't give grants. Let us have low interest loans. So now there's still low interest loans out there. And as I say, Trahan and Seth Moulton are trying to get the money. So we need to keep improving the sewage treatment plants. Paul Tsongas was a great hero of the river, a great hero of Lowell, certainly. A wonderful shot of he and his wife, his young children. And he passed away in 1997 at the age of 56. Here we're looking at his gravestone along the Merrimack River. He loved the river, and it was a sad day when he passed away. Here is an example of what we don't want to see. I think this is in Methuen. We're looking at a big pipe coming from the city into the river. There's debris in the foreground. Shopping carts have tossed in. And if you've been around here for a while, sometimes they find bicycles in the river, sometimes cars, hypodermic needles. It can be a bad place. But this, incidentally, was not from a sewage treatment plant. It's from rainwater from the community. And here we're just about out of time today. We started a tad late, but the Merrimack River and into Salisbury is a beautiful spot. You probably didn't expect to see Richard Nixon today smiling away, but I put this photo, which I stumbled on. Here's Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, Senator Ed Muskie. All of those people helped create the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970. And then in 1972, the Clean Water Act was passed. So it's been, a wild time on the river for 200 years since the mills came in, of course, centuries before that when the Native Americans were here. Here's a photo of the northern end of Plum Island. It serves many purposes. As I said, I have a book coming on Plum Island in June 27th. But as you can see, the glory of Plum Island, the river, and it's just a great spot. That's the end of my presentation. I'll be back next week. Again, I just wanted to mention there's a book giveaway program going on, and I will be talking about that next week again on the podcast. This is 96.3 FM radio, Channel 9 local cable TV, and it's archived on YouTube. And so we've been talking about the river, and we've been talking a little about Merrimack, the Resilient River. Here's a copy of my book. I will be giving this away to different groups, such as the Watershed Council here, different museums, different libraries. And because of Dan Healy, a local benefactor, I can give these books away to organizations so folks can learn more about the river and more about what can be done. So it's always interesting to talk about the Merrimack River and to be with you folks. We'll be back next week. We may have a guest. We may talk about Plum Island. With any luck, I can get Dan Healy to be on this show, and Dan can talk about his interest in the river and why he was kind enough to create the Dan Healy River Education Program that is going to bring information to many more people on the North Shore. So thank you for being with us. This is Dyke Hendrickson. That's the end of our presentation today. We'll be here next week, and we'll talk about the Merrimack River, the history and health of the Merrimack River. Thank you for being with us.